So here's another impact of the lie is you believe others know more about you than you do about your own body. Biggest lie, seriously. You know everything that you need to know. This is why I'm not teaching you all of the breathing techniques. I mean, I'll include them. I'll add that for you, but at the same time you don't need it. Okay? You might think you need it because you've been taught by the medical system and you've been taught by our birth culture that this is the only way to do things. But the fact is that I had the breathing techniques, I had the positions, I knew all of that stuff. But when it came time to actually have my home birth with my daughter, I wasn't doing any of that. I was following my body. And my clients do the same. Is I teach them those techniques as part of the deeper dive coaching that we did. But at the end of the day, that's not really it. You do know more than others do about your own body and what you need. But what does this look like? Well, you're told you aren't in labor just because you're not dilating on time. And cervical dilation, as I said, is not linear. You're told you aren't in labor because you aren't in enough pain. So they crank up the Pitocin. You're put on an arbitrary timeline for birth. Like they say, oh, you haven't had your baby within 12 hours. There's a problem. Your own deep intuition of feeling something is off or that you're actually fine and you don't need this intervention or don't need this test, they're overruled in favor of the medical system guidelines and charts. So this looks like when I was trying to have my home birth with my son, and they said, your baby's not growing properly. And I knew that that didn't feel true for me, but I undermined my own confidence and said, well, they must know more than me. Instead of remembering that everyone is a human first and an expert second, and that their guidelines and what they were thinking didn't feel right. And I was making decisions based on fear, which again is why we have the fear release techniques. So the truth again, doctors are basing everything off the medical model of birth that was made up by assuming women's bodies work like machines. Obstetrics came out in the time of the Industrial Revolution. And a lot of the biology that they had, they were like, oh, it's like a machine. The human body is like a machine. And if the machine pieces break down, then we cut or we fix to make it more efficient. So they invented the forceps and they were pulling babies out with forceps, not recognizing that the malnutrition was contributing to women not being able to be developed properly. There was also a lot of diseases back then. There wasn't a lot of sanitation. Doctors weren't even washing their hands. There were doctors that would go from an autopsy all the way to going and catching a baby. There was the whole idea that women were suddenly being taken away from their families. So the cottage industry was gone and people were now being put into apartments in the cities. The cities were very cramped. They were very unsanitary. There were rats. There's plague. It was awful. Like if you really look at the Industrial Revolution, where a lot of the birth information came from originally when they invented obstetrics, what you see is, oh, that's why. And there was a whole big campaign way back in the 1600s, of course, with getting rid of the wise women who were attending births. And the only ones who were allowed to attend birth after that were the midwives that were really nuns in the church, that they were only allowed to practice a certain way. And they were usually under the tutelage of the doctors. So they were restricted in their practices. So you need to recognize that tools were invented to extract a baby without care of what this would do to the mother's experience. Few women survived. Birth was then pushed into the hospitals in the 1920s, around the same time that women got the vote. They said, hey, you can have a painless childbirth. And they gave them scopolamine and Demerol, and they were like, cut the episiotomy and drag the baby out with forceps. So you recognize that birth was pushed into the hospitals. They added more routine interventions. They medicalized it. They had enemas. They had the IV. None of this was based in evidence. And it takes 17 years for new information to become common practice. And I'm also going to state that there isn't a lot of incentive for medical studies to be done for physiological birth, for true natural birth, and not doing interventions. It's more studies being done to do interventions or to use this drug because there is no money in natural birth. I know it's a very glib and very jaded view, but when you recognize just how the medical system is monetizing birth, you start to see, oh, it goes a lot deeper than this. So when you are relying on the medical system to tell you more about your own body than what is in your intuition, this is when you run into the problems where you get pushed into that induction that you know you don't need, but you think that you have no choice. So how to work with this? You need to toss out the textbook, okay? There is no right way to birth. Remember that no matter what they say, you are the only one who can tune into your body. Stay home as long as possible, even to the point, have a home birth. Don't call in medical support until or unless you actually feel you need to know something or you need assistance. This is completely different from how the medical system expects things to go. They think that they need to do all of the things. So this is going to be a little bit confronting for them, which is why I have the module on how to advocate for yourself, because that will help you work through that. You also need to understand that they're probably going to have a typical way of doing things. So you need to discuss possible interventions in your backup plan ahead of time to help your care provider deal with their fears of trying something new. And there's a three-pronged way of doing this. First of all, you need to get past your fears first and know what you want. Then you need to also have your partner on board for support and any of your support network of family and friends, so that if you do come across a care provider who basically makes you feel like you don't know what you're talking about and they've shattered your confidence, they can build you back up and remind you of why you're doing this. So then you can go back to that appointment and you can say, actually, I'm not going to do this. Thank you. Or you find somebody new. You have that support, because it's great to have that mindset. But when somebody starts to shatter your confidence, if you don't have those people in your life to remind you who you are more susceptible to feeling like you're having to fight an uphill battle, which we don't want. We don't want you to have to fight an uphill battle, because the more you're fighting, the more your body is stressed out and you're not going to go into labor smoothly and easily, because again, it's a tiger in the area.